everybody. If you weren't here last week, we're just doing a 4-week series to kind of start the year off. And it's based around the book. It's based around a book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, which is, John Ortberg was a pastor at Willow Creek when he was younger, and he was kind of a rising star. Willow Creek was this mega church, and he called a guy named Dallas Willard, who's super famous for spiritual formation. And he basically said, how do I survive? How do I remain myself, is what he said. How do I remain myself in the midst of all this? And Dallas Willard just said, you need to ruthlessly eliminate hurry. That was his whole answer. Like, he thought there was more, but he said, then he just paused, and that was it. That was the end of the answer. Again, it's a book about spiritual disciplines, and again, I lent out one last week, but there's lots of books on the spiritual disciplines. This is something that's been written about and practiced for literally thousands of years. There is no shortage of literature on the spiritual disciplines, and so we're kind of just looking at this, but we're looking specifically at the ones around how to slow down, how to learn to live in the chaos and busyness of life, and to just kind of, slow down. And so, now when you were a kid, right, especially, when you were angry, you were frustrated, you were mad or, tired, what did your parents do? What did they do for you to help you?
They ignored me.
What?
He said they ignored me.
Oh, that works. That's it. What did we call it when your kid was having just a moment and you had to do, what did you do?
Time out.
Right? Quiet time, time out. Both things work, right? It's the ignore your child. Same thing. The result is the same, right? It's a time of just being on your own, and it's a time where you're by yourself. You have a little bit of silence, a little bit of solitude is what this is, right? A quiet time is silence and it's solitude. And this was good because when our emotions were all out of whack, you put you somewhere, and sometimes it was a negative thing, like you get a timeout and you're being a stinker. Or you just you're tired, you're whatever, you're frustrated. And so both ways, it's just what kind of recentered us as kids, right? Especially when they're little. Kind of, you stopped and whatever was going on, all of a sudden we're refocused and kind of recentered. It was great, right? Teachers use this, parents use this, we all use this. But in adults, what do we call quiet time? In today's culture? Non-existent, right? There's a word, there's an entire industry built around mindfulness. Mindfulness is the word. You can be a mindfulness coach. I'm thinking of being one after looking it up this week. I was like, you can make some serious money doing this. It's a $2 billion a year, just in America alone, $2 billion a year industry. And mindfulness is just this, and if you go to the next photo, every time, if you Google mindfulness, it's just photo after photo like this. Right? What is this? Imagine that was a child. It'd be dangerous, but also, right? That would be, it's a quiet time. It's a timeout. Mindfulness is literally just a quiet time, but when you're an adult. Right? And if you Google it, it's always, some sort of solitary place. It's always out in the wilderness. And all mindfulness is really, it's silence and it's solitude. It's learning how to be quiet in our world. There's an entire industry about really common sense, right? If life is chaotic and life is busy, take a time out. And you can be a coach and tell people that. You actually all owe me for telling you that. And I'm not cheap. Right? But what it is, mindfulness is, and again, this is kind of a secular version of it. It's becoming aware of yourself. It's becoming aware of your feelings, what is going on in your life. Kind of just centering yourself and just, becoming aware and kind of becoming connected to the world around you. And it's really healthy. They have all sorts of health benefits to these things. Again, quiet times in kids and in adults because, again, life is anxious, life is busy, life moves, it doesn't really slow down, and especially in certain seasons, right? Like we just came through Christmas, and that's the hard part about Christmas. It's like, this time we get to celebrate Jesus and what it means. And yet it's the busiest, most chaotic time, and you're like, yay, this is so fun, right? I was being sarcastic. It's so busy. Well, it is fun too, right? But it's one of those weird things where it's like it's chaotic and busy, but also supposed to be like this time to reflect and slow down, and you're like, we can't do both at the same time. And so just coming through Christmas into this time, so this kind of is a season often, right, where we kind of slow down a bit because you're not doing as much outside. And so it's naturally, even with the season of winter, we kind of hopefully have the ability to slow down. Because part of it, I don't know, if you I grew up, I don't know what generation I am. I'm right on the border. Undefinable, that's who I am, all right? 1980s kids. Well, when we grew up, we did not have cell phones, right? We didn't have cell phones. Even, we had Walkmans and stuff, but that stuff was still expensive. So, when you went to the bank or you were waiting in line, what did you do? Right? You fidgeted, you maybe talked to us, stare blankly out the window and dream. Look at the security camera, right? Sit on a bus, right? If you grew up taking the bus, I used to take the bus to university, right? Hey, you sit on the bus and you listen to people, you look out the window. You had a lot of time to think, right? And we used to have this. Right? We used to have this. And like if you go outside, if you were just on your own, we had a lot more time. Now, if you are in a bank, if you are waiting on a bus, if you have any moment where there's nothing going on, what do? We pull out our phone. Right? And it's not always a bad thing because sometimes you're reading something helpful, something, your podcast, all these good things. There is a lot of good things. I'm not going to pick on phones forever, but just a little bit. But we used to have moments to ourselves. We do not have those anymore because, and I'm not as bad as you, but I'm also bad, right? Right? You instantly pull it out, right? Right? I mean, what did you used to do in the bathroom? You used to read the back of the shampoo bottle. You're like, oh. I did not know that was in there. But think about those moments. We lack those moments. Every moment that we have where we used to have a few seconds to ourselves is now filled. And again, sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's a YouTube video. It's really helpful. Again, sometimes it's a helpful podcast. Sometimes it's a spiritual formation app that you're listening to. It's not always bad, but often it's just something we do. I used to work on a farm for 3 summers in a row. And you would be on the back of a trailer by yourself for hours and hours, right? And it was super boring. But actually, when I left that job and I went to a factory, I realized how much I actually enjoyed just all day long. And I mean, I'm brilliant in my own head, and so it's wonderful, but only in my own head. But you had time. Like, talk about moments. I had hours of moments, just me on the back, just baling hay by myself. But I look back and I go, man, actually, as much as you're like, this it's hot and it's boring, I don't like this, it was actually wonderful. Because whatever happened that week, whatever happened the day before, you actually had time to think through it. And guess what you do when you're super bored and you have time? You often end up praying. And because you think, oh, how about that person? You end up pray for that person. You go, oh, you think through maybe I heard this in the sermon or a week or something at youth, and you start to think about these things because you have time and you have nothing else going on. I mean, you're baled hay, but it's pretty monotonous. And so you start to think, and you start to think, and you start to think. And it's a wonderful thing. And we just don't have this anymore. We don't really have it. And it's in those moments where I think, you're waiting in line and you go, okay, this happened with the kids. Why did I react? Why did they? And you start to reflect. And it's in those moments that you have where you start to reflect. And it's as we reflect on our lives, as we reflect on our own emotions, our own feelings, physical, emotional, mental, all these things, when we had that time, I think it was really helpful. But as soon as we start to fill those moments with everything else, we're no longer, right? We kind of lack that kind of awareness. Because we don't take the time. And again, not to be all harsh on everybody, but it's just a reality of who we've kind of become. And part of, I think, why mindfulness is this growing massive industry is because of that. It's because people are saying, hey, why don't you find a moment? And as we're taking these moments, people are going, hey, this is actually really good. This feels really good. And again, life is busy. Life is fast. There's too much noise. There you go. Life is just too much noise, right? Now, here's the thing. In a world full of noise, we need to find this. It's silence and solitude. Who was really good at having silence and solitude? We'll go through the next 3 slides. First one up is, right? What is this? Fortress of solitude. Superman, in his busyness, craziness, what did he have? He had a fortress of solitude. What did he do there? He just went there to recharge. He went there to be alone. He went there to get away from the busyness, to reflect on who he was. How about the next one? Right? Where does he go? He goes to his bat cave. What does he do there? He's just alone. Now, he's a bit of a loner anyways. That's who Batman is. It's part of why. Whatever. Right? But this is who he is, right? And then the last one, even Spider-Man, right? What does he do? Where does he always go when he needs time to reflect and to think? He goes to the top of the Empire State Building. He goes to some high place to be by himself. And to what? He looks over New York City or wherever he is. I forget. Metropolis. I don't know. They're all mixed up. Gotham? No. Doesn't matter. Yeah. Does not matter. But what does he do? When he needs to recharge, when the world is getting crazy, when he needs to deal with what's going on inside of him, right? Because all these superheroes, they have this internal, he goes to be by himself. Right? They built this into the comics. I think the writers are like, this is really important for us. And all of these superheroes, as amazing as they are, this is how they live. This is what they do. This is what they do. And if they do it, we should do it. But more than that, Jesus was all about silence and solitude, right? Because these are fake and these are made up. But even we can learn from that. But in Jesus, right, when Jesus calls us to come follow me, he says, come follow me. What he says is, be my apprentice. Do as I do. See how I live, see how I practice, and then take those practices and you practice them. And the way that I live, I want you to live. This is what it means to be an apprentice. We learn from our teacher. And so Jesus was all about this. And Jesus, over and over, he went to a place called the Eremos, to the wilderness. Now, in Matthew 3, he goes out to the desert. But it doesn't actually mean desert. You don't have to think sand. It could be a desert. But the word is much bigger than just desert. It means wilderness, the wild. It means any place that is where there's solitude, any place that is uninhabited, any place where you can go and be alone. It could be a forest. It can be a mountaintop. It doesn't have to be a desert. The word is a wide-ranging word. But in that word is always this idea of being alone, just away from people, away from whether it's nature or kind of the absence of nature, whatever it is, right? And it says, it says it's a place that is abandoned, uncultivated, uninhabited. Right? And its barrenness does not refer strictly to the lack of vegetation or life, but a lack of permanent human settlement, right? Which we would call wild or wilderness. Right? It's solitary, it's quiet, it's lonely. It's not about the geography, but it's about the essence of the place where Jesus is. And this is what Jesus does. Again, in Matthew 3, is probably the most famous of the Eremos places that he goes, because he's just been baptized, right? He's just been baptized. And and John has said, here he comes. He baptizes him. God himself says, this is my son. This is the beginning of his ministry. This is like this massive moment of Jesus being revealed in God's voice. And where does Jesus go? And then it says he goes off to the deserted place, to the desert, to the Eremos, to the wilderness. And what does he do? He battles with the devil for 40 days. Well, actually, no. First he fasts for 40 days and 40 nights. And then the devil comes and tempts him. And it's all about who his identity is and his mission. Will he accept his mission? And you've heard it preached probably, and maybe I did too. And I was terrible. You should reject all of that teaching. I told you about it because, right? The Satan was trying to tempt him in his weakness. Right? He waited till he was hungry. He waited till the end of it. But what you discover through Jesus' life is actually Jesus goes to the deserted places because it's a place of strength for him. It's not a place of weakness. He's about to go out and start his ministry. He just came to the baptism. You think this is it. He's going to, billboard goes up. Here I am. Let's go. No, he takes off. And for 40 days and 40 nights, right, he fasts and he's just in this place because he knows what I'm about to do. He could not face the temptation. He could not stick to his ministry and to his mission without this. If he had just instantly got baptized and hung around with his buddies for the next couple of days and then he got tempted, Jesus is like, I wouldn't be in the right place. Not emotionally, not spiritually, not mentally, all of these things. So he goes away because this is a place of strength for him, a place to be alone, a place to connect with God, a place to reflect through what just happened and who he is. Who he is. And so as he does this, right? And so he goes away, defeats the devil. Then he comes back, and what does he do? He starts his ministry. But then within just a few days of his ministry, what does he do? What does Mark say he does again? He goes back out to a lonely place. And what we see in Jesus over and over and over all the time is when Jesus is busy, when Jesus is, when everything is going on, he goes out to the wild. He goes out to the wilderness. And what does he find there? Again, he's not just like into nature and a hiker. He's like, I love hiking. No, right? He likes solitude. And it's not that he even likes it. He knows that he needs it. He knows that in his life, this is what he needs. This is who he needs to be. Because when he goes out into the wilderness, into the wild with God, he connects with God. And what does he hear from God? Again, God is saying, this is who you are. This is the mission I've called you on. And all through Jesus' life, even up until the very end. Jesus, I struggles with this. He knows who he is. He knows what he's called to. But even at the end of his life, he's still like, hey, we don't have to go down this road. Maybe there's another way. So all through his life, he takes these moments to go and to be with God, to hear from God, to be reminded, and to reflect on who he is and what he actually has to do. Because every step that he takes, he's getting closer and closer to the cross. And think how hard that would be. And so he has to take these moments away to be reminded, to reflect, and to know who he is. Because if he doesn't know who he is, right, if he doesn't really know his calling from God, there's no way he's going to go through with this. And so he takes these moments because he knows he needs these moments. He needs these moments to center himself with God, to center himself with who he is, the mission that he is on, what God has called him to. And so he goes out over and over and over. In Mark 6, when they're feeding the 5,000, right? So the apostles, they returned to Jesus. They were just doing all this ministry, casting out demons, doing all this stuff. They've come back, and they've all, they've done everything he taught. And then Jesus says, let's go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest a while. They've just come back from ministry. He goes, we need to go away. We need to go find some silence and some solitude. So let's go off. And he said this, because there's so many people who were coming. So they left by a boat for a quiet place where they could be alone. Jesus says, not just for me, but you guys need this too. You're going to be my apprentices. You just came off a week of ministry, pretty heavy ministry. Let's find some time. Let's find some time. So this is verse 32 of chapter 6 of Mark. So they left the boat for a quiet place where they could be alone, but many people recognized them. They saw them leaving. People from many towns ran ahead along the shore. They got there ahead of them. Jesus saw the huge crowd. He stepped from the boat and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And then the story of the feeding of the 5,000. He teaches them and he feeds them, right? He knows what he needs, but then he has compassion. He changes his mind. But then after all that's done, what does he do? He sends his disciples off. He goes, you go ahead of me. And where does he go? He goes off to a lonely place. He goes up to the top of the hills or the mountain, whatever your version says, because he says, I cannot keep doing this, right? You just came off a heavy week. We need this quiet time. You go ahead. I'll catch up with you. And then after his quiet time, right, it's 3 a.m. The disciples are out there. They're on the water, and they're kind of struggling. And Jesus, this is where Jesus walks on water. And I didn't really catch this before, but Jesus, he actually says, Jesus was planning to walk by them. I didn't really notice that part, right? What's he doing? He's still... he could have been like, hey, it's me. But he goes, no, he was planning to walk by them because he still needs that time to himself. He sees them out there. He sees what's going on. He's like, no, I don't have time for that. I still need this time of silence and of solitude. But then, of course, he does, and he comes, and Peter and all that good stuff. But even in that, he was still planning to walk by them. He was still in need of that time. This is who Jesus is. And it's not just in Mark. In Luke, over and over, 9 times in Luke, Jesus goes off to a place by himself. And Luke actually just says it. He says, Jesus often withdrew to the lonely places. Not because he was a loner, not because he didn't like people, but there was no way he could be Jesus without talking to God, without spending this time. And so as we see Jesus do this, and one commentator, he says, what reason we have to do this is because when life gets quickly and we're moving, he says, we actually have to stop to let our souls catch up to our body. I like that, right? So I Googled that, and it turns out that's been a saying for like thousands of years. Right? It was actually the Sherpas who climb Mount Everest. They go, you should stop every 3 days to let your soul catch up to your body, right? And it's like this time of rest, and it's been said all over the place for literally thousands of years. I mean, everybody takes credit for it. I'll give it to Martin Luther King Jr. just because often it's him online, right? Abraham Lincoln, it doesn't matter. Somebody, pick your favorite. Right? But we need this time to let our soul catch up to our body. Because do you ever feel like that? Like in the hurriness, you feel like your soul's just still trying to catch up, and you're like, man, I'm way over here. Hurry up. Will you hurry? How about you slow down, right? Our soul has to hurry up, or we got to slow down. One of the two. So, of course, the question is, how do we do this, right? How do we do this? Augustine says, entering into silence is entering into joy, right? Or Augustine. I always call him Augustine, right? This is one of our most famous kind of forefathers of theology, right? Entering into silence is entering into joy. This is his view of silence. John Climacus, a friend of silence, draws near to God, he says. And even the Screw Tape Letters, which is a great book if you've never read it. It's about these little devils, and they're writing to each other how to bring down this Christian guy, and it's great. But at one point, he talks about noise and how noise is such a good thing. Again, these are the devil people, right? How noise is such a good thing. And he says one point, he says, let us make their life a kingdom of noise. Because if we can keep their life noisy, if we can keep their life busy, they can't connect with God, they can't connect with themselves, and we have a better chance, right? It's a really fascinating book if you've never read it. And because there's something beautiful about silence. And so in this silence, there's 2 kinds of silences that we need, because there's 2 kinds of noise, right? The first is external noise. That's easy to shut off. What is external noise? It's every noise that you hear. It's everything around you. We can shut that off. It's TV, it's music, it's radio, it's our children, right? Send them away on quiet time if you need to, right? Or just leave the house and lock the door and don't tell them. Either, whatever works for you, right? Is that on video? That could be bad. But there is external noise, and the first thing we need to do is to truly find silence and solitude is to just turn that off. And that's a hard thing to do. That's a really hard thing to do because noise is literally everywhere. It's all around us all the time. It's just life. But here's what I think. Sometimes you've ever been in the car and it's quiet. What do? You usually throw the radio on or something, right? Because part of the problem of having external noise, I think the reason we like it is because we have a lot of internal noise. But external noise keeps us from thinking and hearing the internal noise. So if everything's external, as soon as things go quiet, what is the hard part? What is the hard part about any quiet time is all of a sudden you go, man, my mind is like all over the place and I'm thinking all these thoughts and what's going on. Because internal noise is like our mental chatter, right? Just that like the running commentary of our life, as one guy called it. Replaying conversations and scenarios from the past. I bet you never do that, do you? From 15, 20, 25 years ago. And you're like, I should have said this. No? A couple of you. You just won't admit to it. Right? Sometimes we think about the future. You ever have conversations because you know something's coming up and you go through a whole conversation in your head? You ever do that? Right? Am I alone in this? I'm seeing a couple heads. Okay, good. Right? You guys are like, you should go do therapy. What are the voices? yeah. What are the voices telling you, Dan? Right, we do this. We literally replay conversations we ever had, and that person has never thought about us again. And we replay and think about conversations in the future. And this is all going on, and it's so hard to quiet that stuff. So if we can quiet the outside noise, then we can kind of turn to the inside noise. And how do you quiet that? I have no idea. I'm hoping you can tell me, right? But okay. This is where solitude comes in. This is if we can go and get rid of that outside noise, if we can find a time, just even a few minutes where we're by ourselves. And again, it's this intentional time. It's away from distractions. It's away, and it has to be intentional, not just I found myself locked in a car. Although if you get it, take it. Great, that's awesome. Right? Or stuck in an elevator or something, whatever it is. But it's this intentional time. It happens all the time in movies. Never in real life, but right? But it's solitude is an intentional time where I am going to go, and I'm going to be away from noise. And my goal is to connect with God, is to connect with my own internal voice, my own internal soul, and all of these things. And this is what we're trying to do. Right? And I think I have a thing about solitude is the next one there. Right? I like the solitude with God. It says repairs the damage done by the fret and the noise and the clamor of the world. I like that. This is what solitude is not just isolation and locking yourself away. It's, it's intentional and it's purposeful just to be alone, to hear from God, to hear what is going on. Because God, again, is always speaking to us. God is always speaking to us. It's just, can we hear? And like when Jesus goes away all the time, every time he goes away, why? He wants to hear from God. Because God is the one calling him to this mission. God is the one calling him to this life. And he needs to keep hearing from God that this is where I've called you. This is where I need you to be. And often, and again, you don't need to put your hands up, but lots of people say, I don't feel the presence of God, right? I don't feel the presence from God. I don't hear from God. You hear stories about people who are like, oh, the presence overwhelmed me, or I hear from God. And a lot of people go, I don't experience that. I don't know what that means. And again, I think God is always there. God is always speaking. God's presence is always with us. But when we're not alone and when everything is noisy and when life is so busy, I think it's pretty hard to feel God's presence. We used to read Reader's Digest because we didn't have cell phones. And remember every story, right? Every story about when someone was like, I got stuck at the bottom of a well or in the ocean, or I was always stuck somewhere. And they're always alone. What do they say to every one of those stories almost every single time? Right? I felt the presence of God, or I heard God. And like, these weren't Christian people, I don't think. They just certainly didn't seem to say it. But there's an amazing thing where story after story, whenever someone finds themselves alone in a traumatic spot, all of a sudden they hear from God. And you're like, I think God's been with you your whole life, and I think God's been speaking to you your whole life. But now that you're in this place where you're truly alone and by yourself, all of a sudden you can hear it. Okay? And this is the point of solitude. It brings us to a place where we are able to hear and to recognize the presence of God, the voice of God, and we can have attention and we can be connected. Again, this is why Jesus goes to the wilderness, where there's just nobody else trying to connect with him so he can connect with God. If he's got his 12 disciples around him all the time, have fun connecting with God. Right? Because they're going to be, oh, what about this and what about this? And some of them seem pretty whiny and needy, and right, it's going to be tough. Right? And you have children. All children are whiny and needy, especially when they're little. Right? And then they become teenagers. And I don't think it changes much, it's just a different kind of whiny, right? Your food sucks, everything sucks, our house sucks. And you're like, a couple of people going, yeah, right? So it doesn't change. That's just why solitude is like, it's hard to feel the presence of God when everybody's around you is pulling on your sleeve and yelling, Mom, 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 Mom. It gets a bit tough. Henry Nouwen, if you've never read Henry Nouwen, you really should. I'm not sure you can be a Christian without reading him. Oh, that's a big statement. Yeah, I know. You're like, never heard of him. Well, right? He says, without solitude, it is virtually impossible to live a spiritual life, right? Without solitude, he doesn't say it's not impossible. It's virtually impossible. Again, this is for him. This is a guy who taught at Yale. This is a really brilliant person. And yet in the midst of all of this, he says, if I didn't have this time with God, I don't know how I would live the spiritual life. Because like we said last week, any relationship needs time. With your wife, with your spouse, with your girlfriend, whenever you're dating, whatever, at whatever point, even with your friends, you need that one-on-one time of being connected, of being attentive, of not being on your phone, of not being distracted. And relationship with God is the exact same way. This is what Jesus does. Jesus would not have the relationship with the Father he had if he did not go away and leave everything behind and just hear and talk and spend time in prayer and listening. Jesus did it. Henry Nouwen did it. We should do it. Right? And if you read through the history of Christianity, right, like all of the great, mothers and fathers, the desert fathers especially, and the desert mothers, and all these, the different people who through the centuries they all talk about this. They could not do what they do. They could not be who they are without this. And I think in our life, we go, oh, they sound amazing. That sounds so good. Because I think we long for this silence and for this solitude, right? And it's just this moment. If you're having an anxiety attack, I've been taught this a bunch of times. If you have an anxiety attack, what do? Well, how do you help stop it, right? Right? You ground yourself. What do? You say, okay, what are 5 things I feel, right? If you're sitting, you go, well, I feel the chair under my butt. I feel, I'm holding on to the chair. I'm holding on to something. I feel that, right? What are 5 things you smell? What are 5 things that you hear? What are 5 things that you see? What is that doing, right? It's getting you out of wherever your emotions were taking you and your brain and your heart. And you go, who am I right now? Where am I right now? And it just brings you back to this point. And I've heard so many different people talk about this. And, for little kids, remember the lady that was here preaching? She said, you sniff the cocoa, right? The rabbit sniffing the cocoa. It's about breathing and connecting and feeling and sensing. And no one else remembers that? It was like a game changer for me. I'm like, smell the cocoa. Smell the cocoa. What is it doing? It's doing what silence and solitude does for us. What does silence and solitude do for us? It brings us back where we go, what am I feeling? What am I smelling? What am I feeling? What is going on inside my heart? What's going on inside my mind? What am I hearing? Not just in the world around, but what am I hearing from God? What is God trying to say to me? So we need these moments. We need this for our spiritual health, but also our physical, our mental health. It's all a part of it. Right? It's all a part of it. Even breathing. I had to read a whole thing about breathing. I once heard a whole sermon about breathing. It was actually fascinating, but I'm not going to do it all for you. But reading an article this week, what do you think of the optimal for your health and breathing, just the perfect amount of breathing for slowing down, for calming, but also for your health? What do you think it is? How many breaths per minute? Take a guess. 6. 6 breaths a minute is the optimal. They tested at 3, 6, 8, 15. They did a whole bunch of different tests, right? 6 breaths, which doesn't seem like much, but it's actually every 10 seconds. So it's 5 seconds in and it's 5 seconds out. It's 5 seconds in, it's 5 seconds out. It's slow, but it's not that slow, but it's quite slow. That's not normal for us. This is the optimal. Now, you can't live your life like that, right? Try playing hockey, breathing 6 times a minute, right? You can be a goalie, maybe, just lay there. But in general, right? But as we talk about the spirits of the desert fathers and mothers, these are people who built their life around silence and solitude. They had these things called breath prayers. And breath prayers became such a huge part of spiritual formation still today. And what's a spiritual thing? But I think it's also the physical thing. Because what is a breath prayer? And one of the most famous is just Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. And so you breathe in, you say, Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. You might say, Lord Jesus Christ, you breathe in. Have mercy on me. That's the most famous breath prayer there is. And all of these breath, all it is it's slowing you down. It's forcing you to slow. It's forcing you to stop. It's forcing you to slow your breathing, which you can read article after article about what breathing does for us. And just think about that. How weird is that? And as we think about our breath, think about how many times the Bible talks about our breath and the breath of God and the breath of life and all of these things. And in the midst of trying to be still and find God, it's even just in our breathing. Think of the impact that has on us. And in a world where we just keep running and going all the time, to even just stop and slow our breathing is such a huge thing. Because I think in that, God can finally speak to us as we slow our life. As we slow our breathing, we slow our minds, we literally slow our bodies down. It lowers your blood pressure. Just saves you some money. Yeah. And in this, because what is the point of slowing down? It's not just so that we can, fill it up with, okay, let me skip. No, it's to become aware again. Become aware, take some time to reflect. And this is what we need to do. Right? Again, some people with their breath prayers, right? Be still and know that I am God. Right? Be still and know that I am God. And there's you can read books about breath prayers, right? But it's this amazing thing. Just to focus, to slow down. And this is what Jesus did. One of the most amazing times of silence and solitude, again, is the Garden of Gethsemane. We have Jesus, and what does he do? Just before he goes to the cross, before he gives his life, he goes away again, one more time. And what does he do? Silence and solitude. He leaves his disciples, they're fast asleep, and he goes a little further. And what does he do? He just talks to God one more time, and he connects with God one more time. He goes, I need to hear from you, and I need to know, right? I need to know that this is what I'm supposed to do. Remember, if you can, right? Let this cup pass from me, Lord. But imagine if he had just been out partying that night, going to the cross tomorrow. Let's go have a wicked party, right? Not wicked in that bad sense. I meant in a good sense, like good wicked, right? Then that was a terrible choice of words. Yeah. But you go like, this is my last night, right? This is my last night. Let's go have some fun. And in the midst of hanging out with everybody and having a good time, maybe he goes, you know what? I don't know if I have to do this. Life is pretty good. Life is pretty fun. Maybe I'll skip this. Maybe I'll let this cup pass from me. But that's not what he does. He goes away and he takes that time. And he once again listens to the call of God and this mission in his life. And what does he do? He says, yeah, you know what? This is who I am. This is why God sent me. This is what I'm here for. And this is what this means for the world around me. And so he does it. He goes to the cross. But even in the last moments of his life, what is he doing? He's looking for silence and for solitude. That's amazing to me. It begins with silence and solitude, and he ends with silence and solitude. So how do we do this? Okay. Jesus does this over and over and over. He does this. So I can tell you to find silence and solitude, but what's a really practical way to do this? So in 30 seconds, this is a 5 minutes. Who has 5 minutes a day? Anybody? A couple people are like, nope, don't have 5 minutes a day. I think we can find 5 minutes a day. And if we can't find 5 minutes a day, we definitely need to sit and slow our breathing and think through why we don't have 5 minutes a day. So here's a 5-minute plan for your life. You can write this down. Otherwise, I'll just email it to you if you want it. So for 30 seconds, find a comfortable position. You sit, you kneel, close your eyes, slow your breathing. Take a really deep breath, right? Slowly exhale. Do a breath prayer while you're there, or just a short prayer, right? Like, Lord, I'm here. Quiet my heart, quiet my mind. 30 seconds. Longer if you want. This is only for 5 minutes. And after you find a comfortable place, wherever that comfortable place is, hopefully not so comfortable you're going to fall asleep. Like, don't lay down and do this. Right? We've all tried that. I'm going to pray in my bed with my eyes closed. So find a place. 30 seconds. Say a short prayer. Slow your breathing. And find a word or a phrase. So be still and know that I am God. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. Maybe it's just the word peace, or maybe it's the word hope. Whatever it is, just focus on that word. Just take a minute, focus on that, and just kind of repeat that, right? Maybe you need peace in your life. Maybe you need hope. Maybe you need strength. Just say that word. Just repeat it in your mind. Right? And take a minute because, again, slowing your breath, slowing down. And again, we used to do this we took a spiritual formations class. He used to make us do this. We're like, this is stupid. This guy's so weird. And then at the end, we're like, that was so good. I so needed that. And once you're at that point, then you sit in kind of, this is the reflection time. You slow yourself down, and then you reflect. And in the silence then, once you kind of got your breath under control, just find a short verse, right? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I'm going to prepare a place for you. I will never leave you or forsake you. Fear not, I am with you. My peace I give you is no longer I who live, but Christ in me. Whatever. You might have just a short passage and meditate on it. Say that. Think about that verse. Think about what that means for you. Think about what God is telling you. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. What is God saying to you through that? My peace I give you. What is God saying through that? Fear not, I am with you. What is God speaking to you in that? And as you're thinking through that, just ask God, what do you want to say to me? What do you want to say to me? In that moment, take about 2 minutes and do this, right? Again, this is a 5-minute plan. As you have that verse, as you're thinking through it, Lord, I want to hear from you, speak to me. But also, what am I feeling? What am I thinking? What am I asking of God? Do I need guidance? Do I need peace? Do I need strength? What do I need this week? I just ask. And then for your last minute, just be grateful. Just say a few things. 1, 2 things that you're grateful for that day. If there's something really going on, just put that and say, Lord, I'm so thankful for this, but here's what's going on in my life right now. I really need to pour this out to you. And then end it with, again, slow your breath. Breathe in, breathe out. And just a short prayer. You can, whatever you want to. Thank you, Lord. Go with me in this, whatever you want to. This is 5 minutes. I encourage you to do this because you're like, I'm not going to do that. But there are so many people in life, they say, I could not live. You go, okay, I can't be like Jesus. Okay, be like Henry now. Be like Dallas Willard. Be like somebody else who you really be. I could never be like Jesus. Maybe you go, the bar is set too high. He's Jesus, I'm just me. Thousands of people throughout Christian history, throughout history, this is what they do. This is the only way that they can get through life, connected to God, hearing from God, feeling God. right? Growing in their faith, this is such an important part of it. And I think in our chaotic, anxious, busy life, I think this will be super helpful for all of us. And it'll look different for you. Maybe it's in your car. Don't close your eyes. Whatever it is. I encourage you to find 5 minutes. I think we can do 5 minutes a day. And if you can't do it every day, try it a couple times a week. And I'd be interested to hear, after a few weeks of trying that, of what has God said to you? What are you hearing from God? And the very last slide, Tom, I'm going to close with this, right? It just says, let all that I am, says, wait quietly before God. Right? The psalmist in the midst of their life, they said, let me just wait quietly because that is where my hope is. That is where my life is. That is where I find peace and rest. This is where I connect with God. This is how I'm going to get through this life as I wait quietly for him, right? Be still and know, wait quietly. Sit before the Lord. All of these things. And so, again, these have been preached for thousands of years, the spiritual disciplines. The question is, will we do it? Will we look at the life of Jesus and say, if Jesus needed silence and solitude, if Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man need silence and solitude, if all of the great mothers and fathers of our faith needed silence and solitude, maybe I do too. Maybe I do as well. So I want to encourage you with that. And again, we're going to come at a time of communion. I want us to do this. It's just to take a moment. Literally, let's take a moment. And let's breathe in for 5 and breathe. It's going to be terrible if you have coffee breath, but breathe in for 5, right? And then breathe out for 5. Do that a few times before we come to communion this morning. Just slow your breath. Slow your body. And as you're slowing down, just reflect. Maybe there's a verse, maybe there's a word. Reflect on the cross, reflect on what we're about to do. Reflect on what Christ did for us. Again, in his silence and solitude of the garden, saying, Father, it's not my will, but it's your will. If that means going to the cross to give my life, I'm willing to do that. So in hopefulness and joy and thankfulness, find a word, find a phrase, just focus on the elements, but take a moment to yourself, and I will stop talking.